Welcome to this Photoshop tutorial. In this particular session we're going to look at the use of the pen tool for doing multiple purposes. One, to make a path that we're going to use as a clipping path. If we were going to take this image into Adobe InDesign or Quark Express, then it will allow us to create a transparency effect around the background. The second purpose of using the pen tool is to use it as a tool to be able to make a selection. So a path can be converted to a selection. First thing we need to do is to draw our paths. I'm going to select the standard pen tool, not the freeform pen tool. The freeform pen tool allows you to just click and draw like a pencil. However, it doesn't give you the control that you need to be able to create an accurate path, so I'm going to go for the standard pen tool. Firstly, in Photoshop, just one thing to get used to is these two little icons at the top here. By default, Shape Layers is selected, and this means, this is why I've got my Layers palette here, if I click and start to draw with my pen tool, is that it fills in a shape layer, or vectored layer as we sometimes call it. In this particular case, this isn't what I want just a path. So I'm going to just delete that layer by dragging it into the bin, and then make sure I've got this icon selected, and this allows me to just draw a path. Now I'm going to go around the outside of Ike here. I'm going to then save that as a clipping path as either an EPS or a TIFF file so that we can then make the background transparent automatically, and as I said, put it into InDesign or Quark. I'm going to hold down Apple and spacebar or Control and spacebar on Windows, and I'm just going to zoom in a bit. The easiest way to make paths is to make sure that you're very zoomed in. Holding down just the spacebar, I can then move the image around, which is a good little shortcut. I'm going to hide my layers palette so I've got as much screen real estate as possible. And now I'm going to start to draw my path around him. If you notice, I've got a little X against my pen tool. Now the X means, as it does in Illustrator, that we're starting a new path. So I'm going to set my opening point here. This is the top of the image. It just slightly cuts off the top of his head. So I'm going to set my first point there. I'm not holding down any keys or the mouse or anything. It's now going to follow me to the next point. Now this is where I see people suddenly lose all faith in the whole system. So here I'm going to click and keep my finger down. I've still got my finger down in the mouse, and I'm just going to drag, and you can see how I can drag to influence the shape of this path. So I'm going to drag it to there. A very useful little trick in Photoshop, as it's slightly different in Illustrator, is to create what we call connector points. A connector point is where we have a curve on one side and then a new curve in a new direction on another side. So I invariably use connector points when I'm going around making a clipping path or using the pen tool. So to do this in Photoshop, you hold down the Alt key on both Mac and Windows, and if I position my cursor over the top of the point that I've just set, you can just see a little upside down V next to the pen tool, and this means click now, and I've converted this to a connector. So there's no longer the auto curvature effect, which is the main reason I see most people give up on the pen tool. I'm going to go to here next, click and keep my finger down, and then drag and just try to fit that path as neatly as I can, maybe just erring slightly on the inside. Again, hold down the Alt key, click that point. So far so good. Ideally you want to set a point at every major change of direction, so I'm just going to bend that one into shape, hold down the Alt key, click it, let go of the Alt key, click and keep my finger down, drag to create it there, hold down the Alt key, click that one. The use of the pen tool is very, very important. It's a major skill to have. Now here it's difficult to see where Ike's shoulders meet the background because of the graininess of the picture and the similarity of the tone, so I've got no option really but just to guess. So I'm just going to drag a path to there. Again, hold down the Alt key to convert that to being a connector. I'm going to hold down the space bar, just move the image up a little bit, and then set another point there, and again hold down the Alt key, make that a connector. Now, I know that I'm against the edge of the image, so I'm going to do Apple minus to zoom out a bit, or Control minus on Windows, and then just holding down the space bar. And you can see this just goes very much straight down here, so I've reached the bottom of the image. So I can hold down the Shift key this time, and this will force it to create a straight line. And then still with the Shift key down, I can click just to there, so we're back in business again. Again, do Apple plus or Control plus to zoom in, and then using the space bar just to move the screen around. So I can now start to then go around the little cuffs here. Again, this is quite minute detail, so it would be difficult for this to be probably seen in reality, so your best guess will probably be good enough in this case. But notice how I'm making a connector out of each one. So I'm trying to do this quickly. So go around there. And also what I'm trying to do is to set as fewer points as possible. If you set too many points, the disadvantage of setting too many points is, number one, it becomes more difficult to edit the points afterwards because it's more laborious, as simply there are more points to be moved. Number two, if you print this as a PostScript file, which is probably, I've made a mistake there. Now, just as I'm talking, I'm not concentrating. As I've made a mistake, if I do an Apple Z to undo, then that goes back to the last point I've set. I see people press the backspace key that will then break the drawing, so it thinks you want to start again. Click, set the point, and then hold down the Alt key. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit more so I can see where I'm going. I'm over towards the edge of the image again, so I'm going to zoom out even further. I'm going to take a little bit of a shortcut, go over to here, hold down the Shift key up to here, and then zoom in a little bit more so I can see this edge of the image. Just over here, again click and drag. As I was saying, is that if you set too many points and you're outputting this as a PostScript piece of work, is that one of the common errors called a limit check error in PostScript language, and limit check error is an error that you get at the output commercial print stage, and quite simply it means too many points on a path. The path is too complex to be printed. I only like to position a point at every major change of direction, and you can see I'm always trying to drag roughly in the direction I'm going next, which is the way that it then starts to fit the curve. I could probably use slightly fewer. I might be able to make that one there and just bend that to the shape of his ear. Look at that. That went well, didn't it? Just finish off going around his hair here. It's not the best piece of work, but I'm trying to speed this along a little. And then come around to here, just up to that point there. Again, trying to err very slightly on the inside. Cross over to here. Now, when I get back to where I started, you'll see that when I position my cursor back over the very first point, you can just see a little circle next to the pen tool. That means click now and you've closed your path. A closed path is very important. And if I then zoom out a little bit, is you can now see my path fairly reasonably well. If I was doing this commercially and I had to make sure it was absolutely perfect, I would be tempted to zoom in very heavily. I'll give you an example. I would zoom in very heavily like this, and then I would check that my path is always bang on or just fractionally on the inside. And then what I might do is I might take my direct selection tool and I might activate my path by clicking onto it and then come along and manipulate some of the points, maybe move them slightly into a slightly better position, or even move their direction handles just so that they sit perfectly where I want. Again, erring on the inside if anything. I'm going to double click the hand, which is a little shortcut just to recenter the image. And if we now have a look at our paths palette, you'll see that it's created what we call a work path. So step one in this particular thing is make your path. Step two, double click your work path. I can give it a name, and that then saves your path. Notice the text went from italics to Roman, which shows me that it's a saved path. If I was going to be putting this into InDesign or Quark, then I have to do what we call a clipping path, and clipping is really a computer word for make transparent. So if I click on the little paths pop-up menu here, I can then go to clipping path, and it says which path do you want to clip, and I've only done the one path, which I named as Ike. The industry standard flatness value is 3 pixels, and this allows a film setter to deviate from the accuracy of the path, but any value higher than 3 is that your beautiful curved path could potentially come a little more straight. If you leave the flatness value blank, then it means the film setter will actually institute its own value potentially. Maybe some people's values might be higher and your glorious curves might come out a little straighter. So putting in a flatness value of 3 is the industry recommendation. Click OK, and you'll now notice that the name of my path has gone to outline, which shows me that it's now a clipped path. Finally, I would then need to save this, and I could save this file either as a TIFF or an EPS file. and then put it into Adobe InDesign or Quark Express. And what that will do is it will make this area, and this area transparent. This is what I would call a hard-edged cutout, so it gives a very neat, pristine edge. That's its advantage, but also its disadvantage, because a clipping path cutout doesn't support soft edges. Another feature of paths, though, apart from doing transparency effects into other programs, is to create a path and to convert it to a selection. So a good little shortcut is the Control key in Windows or Apple key on a Mac, is that if I Apple click the name of that path, it instantly converts it to a selection. So as a little side in this particular presentation, now that I've used a pen tool to create a path which I've converted to a selection, is I could go to the Layers menu. It's currently a locked non-working layer, but if I double clicked it, I could then click OK and make it a working layer. I've got him selected, and if I now clicked the Add Layer Mask button, you'll see it converts it to a black and white transparency mask. And there is a quick and easy way of using the pen tool to make a selection to then convert to a transparency mask. So I could slide something else in behind him if necessary, or even save this as a Photoshop document and put it into InDesign or Quark 7, which supports now Photoshop documents. So there we go, the use of the pen tool, a great tool to be good at.